Welcome back, everybody. We are honored and my pleasure to welcome again Joel Shepard. Dr. Shepard's been practicing Hahnemannian homeopathy over 40 years, I think, in Chicago. He's going to address, as you see on your screen, wholeness, the concept of wholeness in the organon. And being a Hahnemannian scholar, Joel is the perfect person to do this, so I'm looking forward to being enlightened. Take it away, Joel. Yay!
Well, thank you, Jeff. I have been in practice for 42 years in the Chicago area using what we used to call classical homeopathy, but Hahnemann, and I have taught the organon from cover to cover for 11 years, and so I feel kind of familiar with it. And even though the language is from another time, after having a lot of practical experience, I think I can update the meaning of the language so it's pertinent to the current times. So today's subject is wholeness. Wholeness is mentioned in the organon. Wholeness, when I started practice, holistic medicine was a phrase that was used a lot. And now we have variations of that holistic thinking. After the word holistic got overused, then people started using the word complementary and alternative medicine. And then everyone thought they were doing that, so that phrase is not as popular anymore. And then came the phrase integrative medicine, probably popularized by Andrew Weil in Arizona and his group. And now integrative medicine is being overshadowed perhaps by the term functional medicine. So all these traditions from the mainstream, the allopathic doctors who learn to see beyond the narrow paradigm they learned in medical school, are still different than the wholeness that's mentioned in the organon. So we're going to explore that a little bit more detail tonight. So we have to sort of develop our own language to distinguish what's happening in mainstream science and mainstream medicine and in alternative medicine and science and in homeopathy. So the term here on the title slide is extrinsic holism of functional medicine. And that's meant to differentiate it from the wholeness that Hahnemann expresses in the organon. And we'll call that intrinsic wholeness. And we'll go into the details of what this is supposed to stand for. So wholeness is the subject. And we have Hahnemann's phrasing. This is aphorism 13. Disease is not a material thing, conceived by the materialistic and has for millennium taken medicine in deplorable directions. That is then a critique of materialism in mainstream medicine and science. It's not only this century, but in the past history of medicine. Hahnemann says disease is not separate from the whole, which is the organism and enlivening dynamis or life force or life principle or vital force, or as the naturopaths call it, the V's. And there are some more modern words that might stand in for this energy body or energy capacity of the material. Hahnemann's first description in the organon of this difference between the homeopathic approach and the allopathic approach. Traditionally, the allopaths would look at a living organism as material pieces all put together in a material body. The organism, says Hahnemann in aphorism 15, is a material instrument of life, but not conceivable without the dynamis. The dynamis is not conceivable without the organism. They make whole the two We're one, the body and life force are a unity, even if the mind's understanding splits the unity into two concepts. A couple points here. We are certainly, you know, responding to material physics and material chemistry, but even though we are subject to the laws of those sciences, we are not governed by them. We are more happens in a living organism than in a non-living physical thing. Second point is, in Western thinking, analytical thinking, we think linearly, or one part plus one part plus one part to equal the whole, when in fact in a living organism this is not the reality. We are not a mind plus emotions plus body plus dynamis plus spirit. We're not those things separately. They are not separable. It is a unity, even though our mind wants to divide them into pieces. We cannot have one without the other. There is no dynamis without the body. There's no living body without the dynamis. A visual representation. This is a Curlian photography of the leaf. The energy body and the physical body are not separable. They are one and the same. So we have in mainstream medicine and mainstream science the assumption of reductionism, and we have open-minded scientists and practitioners who see and observe more and may go in the direction of holism. First, let's talk about reductionism. So this is an assumption of mainstream science. Reductionism requires analysis, which means dividing the complex body into its elements. And if we resolve the body into its constituent parts, then we come down to organs or tissues or cells, and we divide that complex unit into ultimate units that are supposed to be the basis of the living organism, the building blocks of the living organism, such as the cell is the basic unit in cell theory, and genes are supposed to be what generates the blueprint of the living body. So we learn in mainstream science to explain the living bodies by analyzing the parts. This is reductionism. Here we have the cell theory, where if you just add up all the little cells, all the pieces of the cells together, we're supposed to come up with the living organism. Okay, this is the, most people who use homeopathy have gone beyond this assumption, but regular doctors, it is, even though it might be unstated, is a basic way of thinking for them. The gene theory, this is Richard Hawkins, selfish gene, that somehow the gene, which is made up of, say, DNA, RNA chemicals, somehow that set of chemicals can construct, or make all the other chemicals do what the genes want. This is giving some creationist abilities to one chemical over another chemical, but they're all just chemicals. This reductionist assumption that these ultimate parts, like the DNA, can give rise to the formation of the rest of the parts, create the rest of the parts, so to speak, or that the living body is composed or compared to a machine, such as a computer. Computer is a short for the word computing machine, a machine of this age. And that if we take apart that machine into pieces, and then we'll understand everything we need to know about the living organism and be able to put it back together. The sum of the parts equals the whole, as some people say, to summarize this assumption. However, probably everyone who's listening knows that you can't reduce the parts and retain the meaning of the whole. It doesn't work that way. But in regular medicine, this is still the ongoing assumption for most practitioners, that we have pieces like a machine, and they're repairable and replaceable in parts. We even have a warning in a nursery rhyme about Humpty Dumpty, right? When he had a great fall, we had king's horses and king's men, and they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. The king, in this case, would be the predominant and ruling cultural norms. The king's men would be the scientists and practitioners, and the horses would be the instrumentation and imaging and machines of the doctors, tools that doctors use. You can see in the background of the cartoon, they even got the X-ray of Humpty Dumpty. And modern medicine, in its overconfidence, thinks we can know the whole by putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. Well, some doctors, scientists go beyond this simple reductionism, and they realize that in living things there are actually no separate parts, no separate processes, no independent components. It's impossible to reconstitute the parts to make a whole. There are infinite characteristics in an organism. It's artificial to separate them when none in reality separate from the rest. So then we have holistic people, holistic practitioners, and they originally were very concerned with lifestyle. Eat the right food, do the right exercise, change your living habits to help your health. This was the original holistic medicine. Hahnemann says, though, that the reductionism isn't real. Suffering in a local part depends on the rest of the body and is to be regarded as an inseparable part of the whole. What this does is say that specialists in regular medicine is an artificial construct. It really doesn't treat the whole person. And that at best, if you go to a specialist, you're only going to treat part of the whole disease, never the whole itself, never the whole process of disease. Is any disease, with few exceptions, with injuries, mechanical things, is disease local? Is there one little disease thing in one single part of a body? And I think homeopaths have already reached a conclusion that this is not enough representation of reality. You know, the whole is different from the sum of the parts. The parts don't add up to a whole. There's more to it. And so then we had the evolution in regular medicine to a systems type of medicine. This is the application of engineering precepts to biological systems. After all, if you're going to build a bridge, you need to know not only the materials you're going to use, but what's going to happen in the future and the environment and the stresses. And you need to know a lot of things besides the simple components. So you have to have a network of interacting parts or constituents that are coordinated. And in the living body, there's coordination of organ systems with gene expression, environmental, and behavioral factors are all needed to describe the possibilities of disease. In systems medicine, there's an interaction between all the components of disease. This is certainly an improvement in thinking about disease, and has caught the attention of many open-minded practitioners. There's another way of representing it. At the bottom level there is the smaller or simpler parts of the body, you know, the protein, genes, and cells. And the next level up, you have, you know, a larger group, the organ network, and then you have systems working together in the third level. And finally, all these things interacting and working together then is what really is a disease. Well, this way of looking at things is assuming a hierarchy of components in systems, from the smaller to the larger, or from the perhaps simpler to the more complex. But it's still saying that networks are built up from the pieces, and further, as we'll talk about in a minute, built up from material pieces. So then, is it holistic in Hahnemann's sense? It certainly includes connectivity and integration at multiple levels. It expands medicine beyond the simple reductionism, but it is still reductionism according to the Organon. So then why do we say that? Why does the homeopath, Hahnemannian homeopath, say that? The functional medicine of current times, then this is some of their language, treats root causes based on physiology of organ systems working together. That is why it's called functional, the functions of these systems. For instance, there's a transport function of the body that includes multiple organ systems, like the cardiovascular and lymphatic, or there's an assimilation function or system involving the GI, the respiratory, the skin, and the reproductive organisms. And in the current functional literature, they usually use 7 basic physiological functions. They're dividing the body up that way instead of by simple organ systems. Here's a advertisement from Jeff Bland's book. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He was around way before functional medicine. He used to work with Linus Pauling, and they used to call it orthomolecular medicine back then. So he's sort of like the great-grandfather of functional medicine. And in his latest book, The Disease Delusion, he delineates these 7 functions: assimilation, detoxification, defense, cellular communication, cellular transport, energy systems, and structural systems. And then it's the physiological function of these systems that are the disease, and not the name. That's why he's using the word delusion. The word is not the disease. It's the function of these systems. All right. So the functional medicine, they do a lot of tests beyond what standard doctors do. For example, saliva, hormones, and immune globulins, antibodies, digestion, and all the other secretions of the body, urine for toxic metals. And here's a quote from one of their books: just as a mechanic, notice the mechanism there, just as a mechanic might hook your car up to a diagnostic computer to get more information. So they're interested in more and more physiological information, not just the standardized tests that doctors routinely do. And if they have more detail, more of the parts, and then they can give more things to correct those parts of the body that aren't working well. So they often treat using lots of supplements, or different diets, and other lifestyle interventions, but they still assume that disease is a material physiology, and their aim is to treat organ system functions with this material physiology. Okay. So certainly functional medicine is more holistic. It treats at the level of the organ systems together, rather than the organs and the tissues and the cells of normal specialty medicine. But this way of thinking is not based on the true wholeness. True, in this case, meaning Hahnemannian definitions of wholeness. So let's explore that. We have now to use our distinguishing language here. So we have the extrinsic holism of functional medicine. The body is reducible into functional systems. The holism comes from without. What does that mean? It means that you assemble the pieces together still, and to make a whole. This is an analytical whole. It's a mechanistic or based on engineering type systems whole, and it assumes a hierarchy, as we saw. Okay, so this then is what we we're going to mean here today by the word or the phrase extrinsic holism. So what do we mean by the word intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic? So intrinsic wholeness, the word Hahnemann uses in the organon is ganz, G-A-N-Z, a German word meaning wholeness, not holism. So organisms live their lives as irreducible wholes, not reducible to processes of a lower order. The action of the whole has a certain unity and completeness, a concrete reality which is not wholly exhausted by analysis into parts, not completely explained in terms of the action of the parts. Everything affects everything else. Well, let's see if we can give some practical examples of that. Here's a further definition of intrinsic, something that's already built in. You can't get rid of it by breaking it in. If you break it into parts, it's gone. So here's the part where it says intrinsic wholeness is inherent. So compared to a mechanism, a machine, like a clock, the parts of a clock are put together in a certain way. Parts of an organism, however, grow within an integral unity from the very start. They do not add themselves together to form a whole, but progressively differentiate themselves out of the prior wholeness, like a seed or a germ or like an embryo. Everything is already there, and everything to make the whole is already inherent, is already there to make the whole. It doesn't add on pieces to make a whole in a living organism. So that's why we say it's innate, self-organizing, generative, makes its own parts. Okay, so this is the inherent part. Here's an example of the seed or the germ, the wheat germ or the wheat seed here. On the right is the whole wheat seeds, or the wheat berries as they call them. On the left is the analysis into parts, lots and lots of parts. So let's say I took a whole wheat, let's say organic whole wheat flour, and gave it to a chemist to analyze. And he would come back and tell me all the chemical parts that are there. And let's say I gave that same chemist a bunch of the whole wheat berries or the whole wheat seeds, like on the right here, and had him do a chemical analysis. He would come back and say that they're exactly the same. They both have the same chemicals. However, the wheat flour cannot grow another wheat plant. Only the intact wheat berries or wheat seeds can grow another plant. There is an inherent difference. Okay. So the inward oneness of intrinsic wholeness, development in time does not proceed toward a whole, but rather expresses it. The living whole makes its own parts. There is a coherent, meaningful living oneness. And this is not based on a hierarchy from little pieces to bigger ones. It's a holarchy. The physical parts are both cause and effect of themselves. There is no privileged level of cause. DNA does not cause, does not make the organism. Right? It has information available, but it is not the maker of the organism. So this is very hard for traditional scientists to look beyond, to see holism from a different point of view. Here's an attempt, graphic attempt to take everything we know about structure and parts and make it into a holarchy rather than in a hierarchy, and to then use this holarchy to explain why life exists different than non-life, instead of saying that there's some vital force or dynamis or energy ability of the body, right? So it's a bunch of pieces here again, but put in a holarchic way, right? But it's closer to the wholeness that Hahnemann is talking about. Organism is a continuing unity. The unity of the organism is not decomposable without loss. No part of a living unity and no single process of any complex organic activity can be fully understood in isolation from the structure activities of the organism as a whole. And if you do get interested in studying one process, one pathway, whatever, one part of the physiology of the body, it must be reintegrated with the whole. The part itself does not explain the whole. The meaning of any of these activities is understood only in its relation to the activities of the whole. If the whole is known, that we have not only interconnectedness, but interrelationships, interactivities, none separate from the other. And then we have expanded upon paragraph 42, and Hahnemann says the unity of life takes place. There's a indigenous American rendering of the earth there within the person, within nature, and the other way around, outside of the living organism as well. So this is the unity of life taking place. And we also have the unity of the life principle in paragraph 45. Right? The life principle is the organism is the life principle, the physical is the dynamis. They're one and the same, not separable. And so we have Hahnemann's observations on wholeness for this evening, and that concludes the presentation. Anyone want to make any comments?
I am looking for questions. Doesn't look like anyone has their hand raised. So, any comments? Any questions? I know I have a few, but let's see if. No, I lost the attendee list.
Let's see, I lost the slideshow, but I can put it back up if someone wants to review individual slides. Excuse me, and I'll get it back up. Anyone asking a question?
No responses yet, but I have a question, Joel, about the whole holarchy
Yes.
theory. It seems like that's the step before embracing vitality. In other words, that the reductionistic conventional MDs or vets can embrace, or what about that theory? Because I had never heard of it. What is the leap there for them?
So instead of looking at the body as being the physical body, it's still physicalism, still materialism. But when modern physiologists look at how the body works, they see that the DNA is not making the body, that the cells aren't put together to make tissues and organisms. They're seeing that any place in the old hierarchy influences both higher up and lower. Therefore, DNA can't do anything unless it's influenced by other parts of the body. They've tried to create life, in a laboratory, and they found that DNA, for instance, is a totally passive chemical. It doesn't initiate or do anything unless it's stimulated by something else from the environment, mainly RNA in a test tube. But this whole idea of epigenetics has turned the hierarchy into a not useful paradigm. Every level, so-called, of the material parts influences all the other levels from the top down and from the bottom up equally. So there can't be a hierarchy. So this is as far as they go. They will not go to how can all these parts be the whole first. So what makes them together as a whole? So to a homeopath, it has to be the energy that holds it all together, right? Whatever term you want to use for it, the livingness capacity or some other modern term, the healing capabilities of the body, whatever those energy fields, energy bodies, the biofield, as Andrew Weil calls it, is there to enliven the physical. So they're still, the holarchy is just a step towards dynamic thinking about the body. It helps them break away from the strict machine built out of pieces hierarchy. So I don't think the holarchy is there yet. But their observations show that they can stick with the hierarchy any longer. So the holarchy is their new step.
Anyone else? Any other points of clarification? Shelley, Sue, Stephanie, Judy. Let's see who else.
So here's a couple of the practical applications then. If you treat the heart, you're never going to make a person well, right? You have to treat the whole being, the whole organism, the whole living form. So there will never be cures in allopathic medicine, right? Because they never treat the wholeness. And the same thing with the pharmacology. If you have treating with antihypertensives, antibiotics, antis can never treat the whole. And here's a thought example. So what is the opposite of a lemon? There is no such thing as an opposite to a whole living thing. You can only have opposites to a part of the whole. So the opposite medicine, the antis, will never treat the wholeness, and therefore there can never be cures.
Yeah, does that also depend on your definition of cure? Because right now, you can cure the heart disease, but if they don't see the picture of wellness that you're describing, I think.
That's right. The definition of cure in regular medicine is only based on one or a few biomarkers. So, for instance, if you have breast cancer and you remove the breast cancer, 5 years later they find no evidence of cancer cells, you're declared cured. Doesn't matter if that person has terrible energy, if their emotional life is shattered, if they can't use their arm because of lymphedema, whether they are scarred and can't move their skin. None of those things enter into the definition of cure when that word is used in allopathic medicine. It's only one or two simple parts of the whole person, and so they can call it a cure. But when Hahnemann's outlook on cure is that the whole person in all its aspects have to be well, and therefore would not be a cure in Hahnemann's definition.
Joel, it's Susan Beal.
Yes.
I don't even know how to phrase the question, and I'm thinking about several things. I'm thinking about what is it that attracts people to medicine? What is it that attracts people to homeopathy? And what is it in the individual process of maturation, achievement of relatively more greater personal health, and watching students come to homeopathy and sort of come at it first as the science and then as the art and as the whole thing that it is. And what is it that happens, or how do we articulate what is it that happens as folks move from their relatively reductionist experiences into truly looking at that whole concept that we're talking about this evening. Because it's not something that can be firmly taught. I think some of us have it from the beginning and don't really understand how to articulate it. It obviously gets lost in the relative reductionism of language and stuff. It's just so interesting to me.
So, you're talking about pre-science, first of all. That's often called belief systems or worldviews or presuppositions. We all have basic questions that we, by this time in our life, have an answer to, and that's our worldview. Like, what is the purpose of our existence here on life? What is nature?
You have that answer, Joel?
Well, everyone has to have an answer so they can navigate through life, or you wouldn't have made it this far. So whether you realize it or not, you have unstated beliefs and have answered these questions. And where did you get your answers? It depends who influenced you. And so we have cultural influences that are very strong. By the time I see fourth-year medical students, they rotate through our office. They're totally closed. They believe their framework of life, their worldview, and nothing's going to shake it. Where did that come from? So they've been indoctrinated, socialized, brainwashed by by hearing the same things over and over again for years, so they could survive and master the stuff that they're supposed to without examining their worldviews. I mean, they're often religious or they're cultural or their family, but you have answered whether you realize it or not. Why is there suffering? Why is there disease? Why is there death? You've come to some conclusion, and you should examine, not you, but people have to examine their presuppositions and open their minds up to other possibilities beyond what they already believe. That doesn't happen, unless there's some other strong influence or event in their life. It probably happened. Something must have opened your mind up from what you used to believe.
Right.
Back when I started, there was the 60s, and so we had all sorts of things happening back then. And the term we used, we were radicalized. So that doesn't apply to modern times. It's different. People have different events, different realizations, and how do we bring that to new people? You really can't. It's like trying to change a person's politics or their religion. You have to be very careful.
So I guess we need to radicalize Instagram.
Okay.
But that's a great question as far as, Joel, what you think brings the person that's been indoctrinated after 4, 6, or whatever years of medical and vet school, and then becomes, all of a sudden the brain clicks. It's like they never knew that this even existed, and then they're introduced to it and they can't think the other way again.
Yes, that's right. That happened.
And
go ahead.
And I was just going to say, to continue that thought, is how do we sort of incorporate that in our coaching and educational processes and that sort of stuff?
Well, you really have to know the person,
exactly so.
You have to relate to their personal experiences. Like, we have a new homeopath, relatively new homeopath in our group, who had a severe illness and went to all the colleagues who couldn't cure it, went to a homeopath and was better in 48 hours. So when you have that type of personal experience, then it makes a difference. So you have to know where that person has doubts about their belief system and work with that.
It makes it hard to do in mass.
That's right. It hasn't worked so far in mass, but the culture shifts. People understand things that they didn't when I first started medicine. you know, like I don't know why it comes to mind, antibiotics for ear infections. Used to be, you know, if a parent took their child to a homeopath for an ear infection, they were going to a quack. But now parents see, well, the antibiotic might work for the first ear infection, and it's harder in the second infection, and even harder in the third infection. And now they're not working, and they realize that they're not getting new infections each of the time. The kid is getting sick exactly the same way, and the antibiotics are working less and less, and the antibiotics are making the person worse, not building them up, not making them stronger. The parents are made this realization now in the new generation. So it wasn't there when I first started practice. So slowly but surely, you know, people make observations and the culture changes.
So how do you think Herring did it with the book in the box with everyone going west? Was that necessity? They just had to do it. And if we had a catastrophe, then maybe homeopathy would take a stronghold again. But
Well, I don't know enough about Herring's personal life, but you know, like Benninghausen cured himself. He thought it didn't work and tried it, and he cured his tuberculosis with pulsatile. So I don't know Herring's life. What changed him?
yeah, what I meant though is not him, but everyone, the millions of people, or the hundreds of thousands of people that went west carrying, clutching his book and box.
Oh, well, you know, what was the current medicine? The medicine of the time was really tough on people. They used to call it, you know, heroic allopathic medicine. They bleed you to death, or diarrhea you to death, or throw up to death. It was pretty, you know, it was hard on people. And when they saw homeopathic remedies work, they didn't care about all the conflicts and, you know, ideas. It worked. And, you know, that might be happening again. It's going to be hard to convince people of homeopathy for chronic disease. But if we have all the antibiotics not working, and we have these contagious pandemics that are going to appear from climate change, you know, I just read in it, I was in Indianapolis this weekend, and in the Indianapolis conservative newspaper, an article said, malaria is coming back to the United States. Right? There's no cure for malaria. And all the things they have that were working are working less and less in the indigenous areas, the endemic areas. That, you know, the Artemisia extracts and all the quinine extracts are working less and less. What's going to happen? You know, homeopaths believe they're going to ride into the rescue. Well, maybe they will. Maybe it'll convince people of the efficacy of homeopathy when there's a catastrophe. We'll see. You know, Hahnemann found the cure for cholera in the 1830s, and you know, before it even hit Germany. He had a brother-in-law, son-in-law in St. Petersburg in Russia, who sent him descriptions of the disease, because it came from the east and went through Russia before Germany. And Hahnemann just read the case histories and figured out the 3 remedies for cholera. You know, and he made an international reputation from curing cholera. You know, and here we are, a couple hundred years later. There's no cure for cholera still, but it's hard because, you know, it's different with different people. So you still have to work at it. So we have to have trained homeopaths ready to go, and we have to have more numbers. But it's a difficult time right now for homeopathy, at least in the English-speaking parts of the world. According to Barone, it's doing well in other parts of the world. Their sales are really taking off in some parts of the world, but not in Canada, not in Australia, not in the UK, not in the United States.
You're talking about OTC sales, Joel, or you're talking about
well,
homeopathic
over
stuff?
over 70% of their sales are over the counter, and more than that, over 70% are not single remedies.
Right.
Right. So, you know, that's, and what they teach the MDs, you know, they have a official association with the group that teaches MDs homeopathy. So they don't teach Hahnemannian homeopathy. They don't even read the organon. They don't use the repertory, right? You know, it's like, okay, you got a sore throat. Here are 5 remedies with 5 keynotes on each remedy. And then you choose one of those 5 remedies from which keynotes match it. And if they've got a fever, you've got 5 remedies with 5 keynotes each. And you give them 1 low potency of those 5 remedies for the sore throat and 1 low potency of the 5 remedies for their fever and so on. And that's the way they're doing homeopathy. That's the way MDs are learning it on a weekend so they can put it into practice on Monday. So that's a lot of what the homeopathy is going on in lots of the world, unfortunately. But
now, would you consider that kind of energetic palliation as bad or worse than pharmacologic palliation?
So, you know, what are you comparing it to? If you're comparing it to the other OTC substances available in drugstores,
yeah,
which is what they constantly tell us in our arguments, you know, do you want to give them aspirin and NyQuil or whatever, or do you want to give them a combination homeopathic remedy? So certainly we're going to say combination homeopathic remedy, but we're talking about the survival of something that takes a lot of intellectual practice. You have to learn to individualize. You have to learn to choose the right remedy. You can't let these combination remedies take the place of thinking, or else homeopathy will go nowhere. You know, because that's not the way people work, and that's not the way.
Would you rather you see a patient that took one of those combinations and made their symptoms go away? Would you rather see that patient do that, or take a NyQuil, or take an aspirin, or take some other OTC drug that helps them get better?
So if they're not under, you know, their one single remedy for the chronic condition, then they should take the combination remedy over the other OTCs. But we often recommend OTCs over combination remedies if we have them on their chronic remedy and we think it's working. So it depends.
And that brings me back to your discussion, because isn't the I guess it's not really working antipathically, it's more allopathically. Well, yeah, aren't most drugs allopathic, palliative, and allopathic versus antipathic? So, I guess the core question is, we're trying to preserve vitality so the individual can heal. Which uses vitality more? A combination confusing energetic medicine, or an OTC drug that doesn't affect the energetic being at all?
It has to affect the energetic being because it's all the same thing, Jeff.
I think it would depend on the susceptibility, it would depend on the dose, it would depend on the frequency, and that just like not everyone is affected by, well, I don't know. I mean, Joel, what do you say?
Well, so, you know, Hahnemann says you can do palliation for acute diseases or diseases that aren't serious or diseases that run their course, or, you know, lots of mechanical or surgical problems or that you have to interfere with. So palliation has its place. However, if you have serious chronic disease that's going to kill someone, then you don't want to palliate, because it does take energy. And which takes more energy, the combination homeopathic remedy or the over-the-counter drug? You know, it depends on the sensitivity of a person. You know, some people, I don't understand it. I give them, you know, a 6X remedy, and they get so much aggravation, they quit homeopathy, and they go to the drugstore and take antihistamines and decongestants and allergy medicines. It doesn't affect them at all. So it depends on the person.
Okay, looks like We are clear unless, Sue, you have any other questions, or Joel, you want to bring anything else up?
Let's see. So, most listeners are probably practical practitioners, and I know we've kind of stepped out of the practical here, but I think for the survival of homeopathy, we have to be exactly aware of how we're different than allopathic medicine. They know that they don't all can work together. They can't all integrate. It's a totally different set of observations, a totally different outlook on what life is, what disease is, and how to treat it. Okay, that was it.
All right. Well, I don't see any of the questions, so
That's my brain's just going around and around with with that whole business of, is it something to be proud of I'm a pretty boring classical Hahnemannian, whatever the term is that describes that is today. And I don't know, is it a feather in the cap of homeopathy to say that 70% of the sales are OTC in a system that is using predominantly combination remedies, and that's the way it's being taught in the example that you described earlier?
So, and why are we calling that homeopathy?
So, first of all, what is the purpose of, medicine?
Yeah.
You want to help people.
Right.
So we have to help people with the tools that are available. We don't have homeopathic hospitals. We don't have homeopathic facilities. We have to work within the context of our social constructs. And so, we have to do what's best for the patient, even though we're talking, ideas here. Reality is something else. Being practical is something else. So, it's not that being a Hahnemannian homeopath is better, but we know that it potentially has the power to treat the chronic diseases for which there are no other good treatment. And, we have to keep alive that message while we were being practical day to day. And even though we talked in these terms here of pure wholeness, every day we give out herbal medicines, supplements, change people's lifestyle, tell them to go to the drugstore because there's no homeopathic pharmacy open in the middle of the night. There's lots of things we do in practice that aren't Hahnemannian, but we have to know what's important about the Hahnemannian approach and wait for the culture to catch up.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Jane just wanted to point out that we veterinarians, some of us do have homeopathic hospitals for our patients, but they're not people.
So the animals are going to be healthier than the people.
Well, a lot of them already eat better than most of the world.
There you go. Glad to hear that.
Okay, Sue, anything else? Anyone else here?
No, I just like to thank you as always, Joel, for your philosophical and practical composting. I very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you for saying so. Thank you for giving me this forum, and I'm happy to express my ideas, and I don't much have a chance to, so it's a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Joel. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you all next month. And thanks again, Joel. We will hopefully see you soon when you make your next presentation.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Jeff.
It's our pleasure. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.